which is Deputy Catherine Connolly. Thank you.
Is ceist simply díreach just the status of the review of the freedom of information legislation, the person or body that would carry out the review, the terms of reference for the review, the timeline for the completion, and if you'll make a statement on it.
Thank you very much, Deputy, for your question, and I'm glad to have this opportunity to provide the House with further details on the upcoming review of the Freedom of Information Act. My department will shortly publish a roadmap document. It will set out in detail the process for the review and give detailed information on how interested stakeholders can get involved. My firm belief is that we should be seeking to promote a collaborative approach, not only to the review process, but also to doing transparency more broadly. We should recognise that all stakeholders, from the public sector to the media, academia, activists and interest groups, as well as individual requesters, have a role to play in delivering effective and meaningful state transparency for the Irish public, and must work together to achieve that goal. The remit and outcomes of the review will be driven by evidence. The review will accordingly seek inputs from the broadest possible range of stakeholders throughout the process. It is planned that public consultation will take place later this year, which will largely determine the scope of the review. I would urge all interested parties to take this opportunity to make their voices heard and to define the issues that will be considered in the review. Following the scoping consultation, my department will prepare and publish a document setting out the issues that have been identified. This document will be published and a further consultation will take place early in the new year that will allow stakeholders the opportunity to make detailed submissions based on the themes that have been identified. These submissions will be central to the outcome of the review. Alongside the consultation process, my department will undertake focused and targeted information gathering driven by any knowledge gaps identified as the review progresses. 2 particular projects have already been identified as necessary and will commence shortly. Firstly, a customer satisfaction survey will be undertaken to assess the attitudes of requesters and staff members of public bodies towards the FOI process. Secondly, a project that aims to assess the cost of FOI so that we can have a clear picture of the resourcing demands that are required to operate the system as it currently stands. And finally, the review will consider international good practice and developments and seek to take account of the transformation in the manner in which people interact with information since the 2014 Act came into force.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for confirming that there's a review, and that was announced in June, and I welcome that. I'm a little worried about the word "the coming weeks" and the vagueness of it, so if you could be more specific in relation to when the roadmap will be published and when we will actually have the final result with the view to actually amending the legislation if necessary or not. When do you see that? I listened last week in relation to the Sinn Féin motion and your speech, and I thank you for that speech because you put in a lot of detail, and I actually agree with you in relation to that we should be changing the approach entirely. It would be great if we didn't need the freedom of information. However, we do, and we've gone through the whole circular thing of bringing it in, which was revolutionary at the time, but not broad enough, then changing it and bringing in a fee, then removing the fee. Now, I noticed that 50% of all the requests were for individual personal information, which is extraordinarily high. And I'm wondering, why is that necessary? I'll keep to the time because I'm very strict on it when I'm in the chair. So.
Thanks very much, Deputy. Also, just to add that we will be consulting closely with the Office of the Information Commissioner on an ongoing basis as the review progresses, given the central role that office plays. As you know, I announced a review back in June before any of the recent controversies arose, and I want to be clear to the House that the intention of the review, from my perspective, is to strengthen the FOI system and indeed to improve it. It's certainly not about narrowing the scope of FOI or anything like that. I was of the view, having settled into office, that there was a need for this system to be reviewed. Having said that, it is by no means all bad. I mean, there were 41,000 requests processed in 2019, and even last year, 32,652. and the system delivers in 4 out of 5 FOI requests. It delivers a grant in full or in part of the information that is requested. In about 3% of cases, an internal review is sought, and in about 1% a review is sought by the Information Commissioner. And in 70% of the cases that the Information Commissioner adjudicates on, the decision is in favour of the public body. So yes, we need to improve it, and I want to thank the several thousand members of staff who work and operate this system, and we need to listen to them as well, because they can identify gaps and areas for improvement in the system.
Yeah. Thanks, Minister. In a minute, I'm not sure I can do justice to this, but I'm repeating again that of the figure that you mentioned for 20, half of them were personal requests. I know from the local authorities, and I really would hope that your scoping exercise and your analysis would look at local authorities and why applicants on housing lists have to go through torturous applications to get their personal details in relation to where they were or why they were removed. And then, of course, we have the cognitive dissonance of the ministers in relation to the Freedom of Information Act and deleting texts while they're obliged under the law. So we've all sorts of contradictions. And then we've the Commissioner for Information, who operates on a presumption that a refusal is not justified unless the public body shows to the satisfaction of the Commission that the decision was justified. Whereas on the other hand, the public sector bodies seem to err that it's you refuse first until it's dragged out of you. Now, I might be exaggerating a little bit, but really, we really need to look at that. We've seen the case of Ken Fox there in relation to official information being held on non-official forums as well. So there are all sorts of things. If you could give me dates, please, just very specific in relation when you expect the process to be completed.
Thank you very much, Deputy, and I certainly would like to get to a point where the need for FOI requests is reduced because more information is made more readily available, particularly in the area of personal requests, because it can be quite a cumbersome process to get the information for people that they need. I will be bringing a memo to Cabinet, I expect as early as next week, setting out the process and just seeking formal government approval. We want to do this properly. It will take some time to complete the process, and it will be next year before the review is complete. And I also want to just make the point that all public bodies have records management policies, and the position is clear in relation to the retention of data and what the obligations are in that respect. And it must be done in a manner that is consistent with the National Archives Act, the data protection legislation, and of course the Freedom of Information Act itself. So I want to take a collaborative approach to this review. I recognise that the system, while overall I believe is working well, is in need of improvement. I'm determined to work with the opposition, work with stakeholders, work with everyone to bring about those improvements. That will formally commence once Cabinet has approved this review, but it will go into next year before it is complete.